Guys, how's it going? So today I'm going to show you guys how to do the effect that you see in Minit. Now, if you've never played Minit before, then you don't know what I'm talking about, but you've probably seen this effect in other games where there's this circle effect drawn around the player to indicate, like a shadow or a light or a torch effect. I'm going to show you how to do this really I don't want to say really simply because there's probably other hackier ways to do this, but this is going to be a nice introduction to surfaces if you've never done surfaces before, and this is just going to kind of show you a cool way to mess with some sprite effects in GameMaker. So yeah, I'm trying to see if there's any other better examples of this. Here you can see that as as the view kind of gets further and further away from the player, it kind of fades off into the distance. Now, I don't know if this is the exact same way that the developers of Minit did this, but I'm going to kind of try to show you my gimmicky, janky way of doing this. So, real quick, I do apologize for the audio. I'm in a hotel right now, traveling for work. It's pretty exciting, but it's funny because I just got my microphone for my last video, and then here we are doing a video without the microphone. I should have brought it with me, but anyway, guys, all right, let's jump right into it. So the first thing I want to show you is that we have a room created. Now, I'm going to use all black and white sprites just to further emphasize the effect that Minit created, but you can do this with any colored sprites. When I was first testing this out, everything was different colors and blah, 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 whatever. But to do this, I made the background black of our room, and I made all of our objects white, including our player, which is sitting, this guy, right here. So here's just some walls and stuff. I don't have collision set up, but if I go ahead and run the scene, you'll see that I just have some basic movement script running. So let's run it, and great. So I can move my player around. So I'm not going to go over how I did this. That's not the point of this video, but here you can see that we just have a room set up with a player that moves around, and that's pretty much all we need. So on top of that, the only other thing that I implemented is that I have this sprite created. So I'm going to go over this in a second, but yeah, this sprite is kind of how we're going to achieve that hatching effect in the game. So you'll notice that everything kind of gets hatched off. And this isn't a great one. I only spent like 5 minutes creating this, so definitely can probably make a better and bigger version of this that would achieve this effect in better detail. But let's go over the basics before we jump into that, and then we'll get going. So as you can see, we have our player here with some movement code. And that's pretty much all we have, right? We have some game objects, but we're going to ignore those. So all we just have here is our player with some movement code, and that's it. So how are we going to achieve this effect? Well, the first thing that we want to do is we want to create an object, and we're just going to call this surface. And this is just going to keep track of our surface. So if you've never used surfaces before in GameMaker, we're going to go over that right here. So the first thing that we want to do is let's add a create event for our surface object. Let's first, before we go any further, let's first add this surface object into our room. So here's our room. Let's go ahead and drag this right up into the top left corner. All right, great. So there we have our surface object in our room now. So let's add some code. So first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to create some variable. Because what we want to do is we want to create our surface. Now, GameMaker, by default, draws all of the artwork and every sprite onto the default surface. Okay, so think of it like this piece of paper is a surface, right? So we have this surface here, and there's just some paperwork and stuff that just gets drawn on, or there's just something that gets drawn onto it, right? So if I have my pen and I draw onto this surface here, we're going to see something, right? And this is the way GameMaker defaults it. There's a default surface that GameMaker draws to. However, imagine we had, I did not plan this out very well. Okay, here we go. Imagine that this napkin here is also our surface, is another surface that we define, okay? So we lay this surface out over our previous surface, and now what we can do, and it's great because this napkin's kind of transparent, so it'll kind of achieve the effect that I want, is now when we draw to our custom defined surface, this napkin, we can draw to this surface, and then we can draw to this surface. And if we draw to this surface, we get some more flexibility because we can control what this surface does while still maintaining the GameMaker's default surface in the background. And then what's cool with this is we can adjust the opacity, we can adjust how it's drawn to the screen, we can adjust all these crazy details and properties of this surface so that it creates a cool overlay effect that sits on top of our default surface. Okay, great. So now there's that quick run through. So GameMaker already defines our default surface for us, so we don't have to do anything for that, but we want to create our custom surface. So we're going to say surface, and if we look for the autocomplete, we're going to see all of these surface functions. So we're going to say surface create. Let's create our surface. Now, how big do we want our surface to be? Well, you could define this to be any size depending on the project that you're working on. But for this project, we're just going to go ahead and default it to the size of the room. So we're going to say the width is equal to room width, the height is equal to room height, and now we have created our surface. Now, it's also going to be helpful if we assign this surface to some variable. So I'm just going to call it surf. You could be more descriptive if you have a bunch of surfaces that you're using. You'd probably want to name these, something relative. So we could just call this minute effect, right? And then that would be a better surface name. But for simplicity and to save me some typing later on, I'm just going to call it surf. Okay. Great, so we've created the surface. Now the first thing we need to do every time we create a surface is make sure we clean up this surface. So if for some reason this surface object gets destroyed, we need to destroy this surface. And we're going to say that by saying surface underscore free, and we're going to pass in the variable name of this surface, and that is surf. So come over here, copy and paste it. So now if anything happens to this object, surface object, we're going to free up this surface. Now this is the same way that we do whenever we're using data structures, so any sort of DS lists, DS grids, we have all of these variables, methods to delete these data structure variables, right? Because we want to make sure that we're managing our memory properly and we don't lose any of these and kind of just let them float in existence. So we need to make sure that just the same way that we delete lists and we delete grids and data structures and maps and all that stuff, we need to also do the same thing for whenever we create a surface. So we're going to put that in the destroy method here. Okay, nice and simple. Now all we need to do is we're going to just say, let's create a draw event, and we're going to say, okay, if surface exists, and then we're going to paste in the name of our variable, surf. So if this surface variable exists, we are going to draw the surface. And we're going to say ID is surf, and we want to draw this at 0, 0. So this is going to be the 0, 0 of the room. So if we look at our room here, oops, let's open it up. We look at our room, we're going to draw this in the 0, 0 coordinate here, and our surface is set to the room width and height, so it's going to draw over our entire room here. Okay, so that's all we have to do for our surface variable. We've defined our surface object, so we've defined a surface, and now we're just saying, hey, if this surface exists, let's draw it, and when we're done with it, let's free it from memory and send it away forever. Okay, nice and simple. You've just created your first surface. It wasn't even that hard, right? So now let's do something with this surface. So in our player event, since we're going to have this like little light effect follow our player, we're going to do all of this code inside of our player. Now we could have some other outside, we could have all this, we could have the surface object that we just created do all of this effect and drawing that we did. But I'm going to do it inside the player, and I'll show you why. So let's go ahead and create a draw event, right? Because we're drawing to our surface. And let me just look at my notes here, make sure that I don't miss anything. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to just check to make sure that our surface exists, right? We don't want to draw to a surface if it doesn't exist, because then we'll get some errors and bugs and things will break, and that's not great. So first thing we want to do is we want to say if surface exists, and then we're going to say surface, that's our object, and the variable of it is surf. Okay, so if this surface exists, what we want to do is we want to set the target. So remember, by default, GameMaker is drawing to its default surface. So we want to say, hey, hold on, GameMaker, instead of, for this second, right here in this frame, instead of drawing to the default surface, we're going to set the target to our own custom defined surface, and we're going to draw to that instead. So we're going to specify what surface we want to draw to, and we're going to say, surface surface.surf. Okay, so now we've set the target, but we want to make sure that we reset the target when we're done with that. So I'm going to say surface reset target. Okay, so that means once we're done with whatever we're going to put inside here, we set the target to our custom surface, we draw to it, and then when we're done with it, we reset it back to the default surface. And that's what this reset does. So now we're just going to wrap whatever we want inside of this kind of block of code here so that it draws to our surface. So the first thing that we can do is we can make sure that we clear our surface. So let's say that there's something still existing on our surface from before. It's always a good practice to just clear off your surface and just wipe it free. Because by default, GameMaker does this. Every frame before it draws onto the screen, it clears everything off and it draws onto it again. So if you turn that off, it would draw and then your character would move and it would draw again and you would see like a shadow effect of your character in the background. But because GameMaker by default resets the surface and re-cleans it every frame, you just see this updated movement position and it gives that appearance of movement. So we want to do that same thing for here because we don't want to keep a lasting image of our previous surfaces. We want to wipe it clean, update it so that it looks like it moves around and is dynamic. But if you wanted to get kind of weird and wild with this, you could totally turn off this and just kind of see what happens. But for now, we're going to clear the surface. So I'm going to say draw clear alpha, and we're going to say C black. We're just going to draw a black color, and we're going to just draw an alpha of 0. Now, if this was an alpha of 1, we would not see anything, right? So here, I'll comment this out, I'll run the project, and here we will see that everything looks normal, right? Okay. Oh, our player doesn't exist, but that's okay. We haven't drawn our player yet. So let's draw our player. I'm going to say draw self. Okay. So, but now if I uncomment this and I say draw clear alpha, C black, or let's do something ridiculous. Let's do like red. Ooh, getting wild. And I set that alpha to 1. When we play this, we're going to see that we're drawing a red screen over everything, okay? Right? So, and remember, like I said, our surface is the size of the room, so when we say draw clear, it's drawing to that whole surface. Okay, so what we want to do is we just want to say draw black, and we're going to say 0 alpha. So this is just going to basically squeegee clean our surface, so now we can draw whatever it is that we want onto it. Okay, so now we've cleaned our surface, so we'll say clean surface. Okay, now what we want to do is draw, we want to draw a black screen over it. So we could theoretically just set this black alpha to 1 and do it this way, but I'm just going to show you, I think this is a better way to think of this, is to think of cleaning it first, and then we're going to start drawing all the things we want to. So the first thing we want to do is after we've cleaned it, we want to draw the whole screen black, and I'll show you why in just a second. So we're going to say draw set color, C black. Oh my gosh. And what we want to do is we're going to draw a rectangle. So we could use draw rectangle color to achieve the same effect, but this forces you to add the color variable in 4 times, which is a lot of typing. So I'd prefer to just set the draw color to black. Let's draw our rectangle at 0, 0, room width, room height, and we're not going to do any outline, so we're going to set that to false. So now what this will do is this will set the universal draw color to black, we'll draw a rectangle over the whole screen, and then we will draw the set color, draw set color, back to C white, which is just our default draw color. So the GameMaker by default has draw set color to white always. So that's what we will draw it. So we set it to black, we draw a rectangle black to the screen, and we reset it to white. So now if I save this and I run this, what we're going to see is we're going to see a whole black screen in our room. Ah, exciting. Nothing really to look at. Okay, so now here's where we get kind of tricky with it and we get to do some really cool stuff. So first thing we want to do is, okay, so I'm going to, instead of using this circle sprite that we've imported, I'm going to just show you how to do this first using just a generic circle. So what we want to do is we want to draw the circle to the screen, right? We want this circle radius effect to surround the player while they're walking through. So theoretically, we would normally just say draw circle, and then we would say X, Y of our player. We'd set our radius to, I don't know, 50, and then we would say no outline. Okay, so that's normally what we do. Now, but if we do that, we're not going to see anything. Well, actually, I'll show you what we do. We've set our draw color to white, and now we're going to draw a circle. So we're going to get a white circle that follows the player. See, okay. Now this is kind of getting close to the effect that we want, but the problem is that we draw a black screen, and then we draw a white circle on top of it, and our player is all the way sitting back here. So how do we see our player, right? Well, instead of adding the circle onto the black screen, what we want to do is we want to actually cookie cutter the circle out of the screen, so that now we have this black screen that's on our surface, our player sitting back here, and we kind of just cookie cutter this hole out of the surface so that we can see the player. So instead of adding this circle to the surface, we want to subtract this circle from the surface, right? So we have our default surface, we have our napkin surface, all right? And this napkin surface is now black. So here it is right here, it's black, right? But we want to just take like a hole, we want to take a little hole and puncture that right through here. And so as the player moves, we get to see it. All right, I think you guys get the point. Let's do it real quick. So here it is. So instead of so we want to draw this circle like normal, but instead of adding it, like I said, we want to subtract it. So what we do is we say GPU, all right, this is for our graphics processor, right? We're going to say set blend mode. And what we can do is we can say BM for blend mode, and we're going to say subtract. So now instead of adding to the surface, anything that we draw is going to be subtracted from the surface. So we subtract from the surface, we draw our circle, and now we're going to reset the blend mode. So we're going to say GPU set blend mode, blend mode, and we're going to say BM normal. So this is going to set the blend mode back to normal. So now if I play this, what we should get is we should get this negative cookie cutter effect where it's getting subtracted from the surface. Okay, and there it is. So as we walk close to walls and stuff, we can see that they start to show up inside this radius. Okay, so we basically created the effect. We're like 99% of the way there. If you noticed, though, when we go to these blend modes, look at, there's so many different blend modes, and there's so many cool things like this that you can do with the GPU effects and all this stuff that I haven't even touched on. So I encourage you to experiment and try some weird things and see what you can get. So, okay, so we're going to set this back to normal. So instead of drawing our circle, what we instead want to do is we want to draw our sprites. So as I mentioned, we're going to say draw sprite ext, and let's look at what we need to import. So we need to set the sprite. So I'm going to draw this circle effect. So instead of being just a solid subtraction that we take from it, we're going to get this kind of weird gradient kind of feathering, hatch shading effect that gets taken away from it. So I'm going to say S circle, because I just named it circle. I'm going to say subimage 0 at our X and Y position. I accidentally made this a little small, so I'm just going to multiply it by 3, set a 0 rotation, color is white, alpha is 1, and I end that. So now, if I hit play, instead of drawing a circle and cookie cuttering that out of our surface, we're now going to draw a sprite onto our surface, this weird sprite onto our surface, and subtract that. And because our background is black, we don't notice this effect until we walk up to things, and that's what kind of creates this cool effect. So yeah, so that's basically it. That's it, we did it. Now obviously, like I said, this isn't quite as good looking as the way that Minit does it, but I hope this shows you guys a cool way to start playing around with this, the blend mode subtraction. I'm going to link to a tutorial in the description down below that I first found out about this, where they show how to create the terrain, dynamically breaking up terrain like you see in the Worms games, and that's where I first saw this. So if you want to see another way to implement this GPU subtraction blend mode, I'll check out that video. But otherwise, that's it for this tutorial, guys. I think I kept it relatively short. Oh my gosh, not another 45-minute tutorial. What is going on? If you do want to watch a 45-minute tutorial, check out my other videos on my channel. I have some cool things I'm working on for you guys, so they're coming, don't worry. I appreciate you. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.